The morning started like any other at Clarence's house. Camilla was having her tea in the private sitting room, looking through some old correspondence when she heard the commotion downstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble hallway, and voices grew louder by the second. She set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized the authority in those commanding tones. Within moments, her private secretary burst through the door, his face pale and worried. Behind him stood 4 royal guards in their formal uniforms, accompanied by 2 officials from the Royal Collection Trust. The lead guard, a stern-faced man named Captain Morrison, held a rolled document sealed with the royal crest. Camilla rose from her chair, trying to maintain her composure despite the confusion swirling in her mind. She had been queen consort for years now, but the sight of armed guards entering her private quarters sent a chill down her spine. Captain Morrison stepped forward and unrolled the document, his voice formal and unwavering as he read the official order. The words hit her like cold water. There had been reports, he explained, of missing items from the late Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. Several priceless pieces that should have been catalogued and transferred to the royal collection after her passing had never been accounted for. An anonymous tip had suggested that some of these items might be in Camilla's possession, though no one was making direct accusations yet. Camilla felt her face flush with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She had never taken anything that wasn't rightfully hers. Every piece of jewelry, every heirloom she wore had been gifted to her properly, or had belonged to her own family for generations. The suggestion that she might have stolen from the late queen was not just offensive but deeply hurtful. Captain Morrison explained that they had orders to search her private chambers and examine her personal collection of jewelry and artifacts. It was a routine investigation, he assured her, but it had to be done. Camilla had no choice but to agree, though her mind raced with worry about what people would think if this news leaked to the press. The guards moved through her rooms with military precision, opening drawers and examining every corner. Camilla watched helplessly as strangers rifled through her most personal belongings. They photographed everything, made notes on their tablets, and carefully packed several items into secure cases for further examination. Her jewelry boxes were opened one by one. The officials scrutinized each piece, comparing them against photographs and detailed descriptions from the Royal Collection's database. Camilla tried to remember where each item had come from. Some were wedding gifts from Charles, others belonged to her grandmother, and a few were pieces she had purchased herself over the years. As the search continued into the afternoon, Camilla sat quietly in her chair, feeling more like a suspect than a member of the royal family. Her staff hovered nearby, equally distressed by the situation. The normal routines of the household had ground to a halt, and an uncomfortable tension filled every room. Captain Morrison approached her with a locked chest they had found in the back of her wardrobe. Camilla recognized it immediately. It had been delivered to her shortly after Queen Elizabeth's funeral, along with a handwritten note from one of the late Queen's ladies-in-waiting. The note had simply said that the Queen had wanted her to have it, but in the chaos and grief of those days, Camilla had stored it away without opening it properly. The guards forced open the lock with official permission, and everyone in the room leaned forward as the lid was lifted. Inside, wrapped in purple velvet cloth, were several items that made Captain Morrison's eyes widen. He immediately radioed for additional security and specialists from the Royal Collection Trust. What they found inside that chest would change everything. There were pieces that hadn't been seen in public for decades, items that historians thought were lost forever. A diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, a set of pearl earrings that Queen Mary had worn on her wedding day, and several other pieces that carried immense historical significance. But these weren't just random treasures. Attached to each item was a small handwritten tag in Queen Elizabeth's distinctive script. Each tag bore a date and a brief note explaining the item's history and significance. At the bottom of the chest was a sealed letter, also in the late Queen's handwriting, addressed to Camilla. Captain Morrison carefully opened the letter and read it silently first, his stern expression softening as he progressed through the words. He looked up at Camilla with something approaching respect, perhaps even sympathy. He handed her the letter without a word. Camilla's hands shook as she unfolded the delicate paper. The letter was dated just 3 months before Queen Elizabeth's death. In it, The late queen explained that these pieces were not part of the official royal collection, but were her personal property to dispose of as she wished. She had chosen to leave them specifically to Camilla, not as queen consort, but as the woman who had brought happiness back into Charles's life. The letter went on to explain that each piece had a special meaning. The diamond brooch had been worn by Queen Victoria during some of her darkest days after Prince Albert's death, a reminder that even in grief, duty continues. The pearl earrings had been Queen Mary's symbol of hope when she married into uncertainty. Each item represented strength, resilience, and the ability to face public scrutiny with grace. Queen Elizabeth wrote that she knew Camilla's path had not been easy, that she had faced criticism and doubt from many corners, but the late queen had watched her grow into her role, had seen her dedication to Charles and her commitment to service. These treasures were meant to remind Camilla that she was part of a long line of strong women who had faced their own challenges and emerged with dignity. As Camilla read through tears, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. The guards and officials who had arrived with suspicion in their eyes now stood awkwardly, realizing they had been part of something far more personal and profound than a simple investigation. Captain Morrison cleared his throat and quietly ordered his team to document everything carefully, but respectfully. The investigation would continue, he explained, but it was clear that these items were legitimately Camilla's. However, given their historical significance, there would need to be discussions about how they should be preserved and whether some should be displayed for the public to appreciate. For now, they would remain in Camilla's custody, but with proper documentation and security measures in place. As the guards finally prepared to leave, Camilla sat alone with the open chest before her, the letter still clutched in her hand. She had always respected Queen Elizabeth, but she had never fully understood the depth of the late Queen's private support and approval until this moment. The news of the royal guard's visit to Clarence House spread through the palace staff like wildfire, though everyone had been sworn to secrecy. Camilla spent the evening alone, carefully examining each piece from the chest, reading and rereading Queen Elizabeth's letter until she had memorized every word. The weight of the late Queen's trust felt both comforting and overwhelming. Charles arrived late that night from an official engagement, immediately noticing his wife's red-rimmed eyes and the unusual silence in their private quarters. When Camilla showed him the letter and explained what had happened, he sat down heavily, his own eyes growing misty. He had known his mother was fond of Camilla, but this gesture revealed a depth of acceptance and approval that went beyond what anyone in the family had fully realized. Over the next few days, experts from the Royal Collection Trust came quietly to examine and document the treasures. Dr. Helena Marsh, the senior curator, was particularly excited about one piece, a small locket that had belonged to Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice. Inside was a miniature portrait and a lock of hair, items that historians had believed were destroyed in a fire at Windsor Castle decades. Dr. Marsh explained that Queen Elizabeth must have kept these items separate from the official collection specifically because of their intimate personal nature. They weren't crown jewels or state regalia, but private mementos that had been passed down through generations of royal women, usually to someone the giver felt especially close to or wanted to encourage. As word of the discovery began to circulate in hushed tones among royal historians and trusted palace officials, questions arose about why Queen Elizabeth had chosen this particular method of transfer. Why hadn't she simply announced her gift publicly or included it in her official will? Dr. Marsh suggested that the late Queen might have wanted to protect Camilla from immediate scrutiny, knowing that any public gift would be analyzed and criticized by those who still questioned her place in the royal family. Meanwhile, the anonymous tip that had triggered the investigation became a topic of intense speculation. Captain Morrison's team was quietly trying to trace its origin, though whoever had made the report had been careful to remain untraceable. Some suspected it was someone within the palace staff who harbored resentment toward Camilla, while others wondered if it might have been a misguided attempt by someone who genuinely believed items were missing. Camilla tried to focus on her regular duties, attending charity events and official functions, but she could feel the whispers following her. Although the official statement released to the public was carefully worded to avoid any hint of wrongdoing, The mere fact that royal guards had conducted a search was enough to fuel speculation in certain circles. One afternoon, while reviewing the treasures with Dr. Marsh, they discovered something that had been overlooked in the initial examination. Hidden in a secret compartment at the bottom of the chest was a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside belonged to several different people, spanning over a century. The journal was a private record kept by royal women, passed down through generations. Queen Victoria had started it, writing advice and reflections for her daughters. Queen Alexandra had added her own entries, as had Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Queen Elizabeth II had made her final entry just weeks before her death. Reading through the journal felt like eavesdropping on history. These women wrote about their struggles with public perception, the loneliness that sometimes came with their positions, and the strength they found in duty and family. They wrote about the criticism they faced, the mistakes they made, and the lessons they learned. It was deeply personal, far removed from the carefully crafted public images presented in official biographies. Queen Elizabeth's final entry was addressed to Camilla directly. She wrote about her own experience of being young and uncertain, of making mistakes and learning from them. She acknowledged that she had initially been protective of Charles during his divorce and remarriage, concerned about the monarchy's future and the public's reaction. But over the years, she had watched Camilla grow into her role with grace and dedication. The late Queen wrote that she recognized in Camilla the same resilience that had helped the royal family survive so many challenges over the decades. She saw someone who had been tested by public opinion and media scrutiny, but had never wavered in her commitment to Charles or her duties. The treasures in the journal were meant to remind Camilla that she was not alone, that other women in her position had faced similar challenges and had found their way through. Camilla sat in stunned silence as Dr. Marsh quietly excused herself to give her privacy. The weight of this legacy was almost too much to bear. These weren't just historical artifacts. They were a direct line of communication from women who had walked the same difficult path, offering their hard-won wisdom and support across the years. That evening, Camilla showed the journal to Charles. They spent hours reading through the entries together, discovering aspects of his grandmother's and great-grandmother's lives that had never been part of the official record. Charles was particularly moved by an entry from Queen Mary, who wrote about the difficulty of leaving her own family behind when she married, and the years it took for her to feel truly at home in her role. The discovery of the journal added a new dimension to the investigation's aftermath. The Royal Collection Trust now faced a delicate question. Should this deeply personal record become part of the official archives, available to historians and researchers, or should it remain private, as Queen Elizabeth had apparently intended? Captain Morrison returned to Clarence House with his final report. The investigation was officially closed, with all items confirmed as legitimate gifts to Camilla. However, he had news about the anonymous tip. His team had traced it to a former palace employee who had been dismissed months earlier for misconduct. The individual had apparently seen the chest being delivered and jumped to conclusions, hoping to cause embarrassment for Camilla. While the revelation explained the tip's origin, it did nothing to ease Camilla's concern about the damage to her reputation. Even though she had been cleared of any wrongdoing, she knew that some people would always remember only that royal guards had searched her possessions, not the beautiful reason behind what they found. Charles, seeing his wife's distress, suggested they use this situation to create something positive. Perhaps they could arrange a special exhibition of the treasures with explanatory text that would tell the full story, including Queen Elizabeth's letter. It would be a way to honor his mother's memory, while also demonstrating the continuity and personal bonds within the royal family. Camilla was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with drawing more attention to what felt like a very private matter. But as she thought about the journal entries and the generations of women who had faced their own trials publicly, she began to see the wisdom in Charles's suggestion. These treasures and their story weren't just about her. They were about the enduring strength of the institution they all served. Dr. Marsh was thrilled with the idea and began planning immediately. The exhibition would need to be carefully curated, balancing public interest with respect for the personal nature of the items. They would need to decide which pieces to display, and how much of Queen Elizabeth's letter to share with the public. As preparations began, Camilla found herself thinking often about the women who had owned these treasures before her. Each piece had been held by hands that had signed important documents, waved to crowds and wiped away private tears. Each had been worn by women who had loved and lost, celebrated and mourned, all while maintaining the dignity their positions required. 3 weeks after the discovery, Camilla made a decision that surprised even Charles. She wanted to personally meet with the former employee who had made the anonymous tip, not to confront them, but to understand what had motivated such an action. Charles was concerned about the emotional toll this might take, but he recognized the determination in his wife's eyes. The meeting was arranged through legal channels, held in a private office with security present but at a discreet distance. The former employee, a woman named Margaret Stevens who had worked in the household management department, arrived looking nervous and defensive. She was in her mid-50s, had worked at the palace for nearly 20 years, and her dismissal had been related to improper handling of confidential information. Camilla entered the room with quiet dignity, offering tea as if they were simply two people meeting for a conversation. Margaret was clearly thrown by this approach, having expected anger or legal threats. Instead, Camilla asked her directly why she had made the report about the missing treasures. Margaret's defenses crumbled almost immediately. Through tears, she explained that she had been devastated by her dismissal, feeling that her years of loyal service had been forgotten over one mistake. She had seen the chest being delivered and overheard fragments of conversation about it, containing the late Queen's personal items. In her bitterness, she had convinced herself that Camilla was somehow taking advantage of her position, and she had made the report hoping to expose what she believed was wrongdoing. She admitted now that she had never actually known what was in the chest or had any real evidence of theft. She had simply wanted to cause trouble, to make someone else feel as hurt and rejected as she felt. Seeing the news reports about the investigation being closed and learning the true story of Queen Elizabeth's gift had filled her with shame and regret. Camilla listened without interruption, her face showing compassion rather than the anger Margaret had expected. When the woman finished speaking, Camilla was quiet for a long moment before responding. She spoke about the loneliness and frustration that can come from feeling unseen or unappreciated, about how easy it is to lash out when we're hurting. She also shared, more openly than she had with almost anyone outside her closest circle, about the years of criticism and scrutiny she had faced, the constant feeling of being judged and found wanting by people who didn't know her. She talked about the pain of reading false stories about herself in newspapers, of knowing that some people would never accept her no matter what she did. Margaret listened in stunned silence, perhaps realizing for the first time that even someone in Camilla's position could feel vulnerable and hurt. Camilla explained that she wasn't telling her this to excuse what Margaret had done, but to illustrate that everyone carries their own burdens, and causing pain to others doesn't ease our own suffering. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, Margaret was sobbing openly, apologizing repeatedly for her actions. Camilla didn't immediately forgive her, but she didn't condemn her either. Instead, she suggested that Margaret seek counseling to work through her feelings about her dismissal and her career change, and she offered to provide a reference for future employment if Margaret could demonstrate genuine growth and accountability. When Charles heard about the meeting later, he was moved by his wife's compassion but not surprised. It was one of the qualities he loved most about her, this ability to see the humanity in people even when they had wronged her. He mentioned that his mother had possessed a similar quality, though she had expressed it differently. Meanwhile, plans for the exhibition continued. Dr. Marsh and her team had been working with Camilla to select which pieces would be displayed and how the story would be presented. They decided to include excerpts from Queen Elizabeth's letter, carefully chosen to honor her wishes while sharing the beautiful sentiment behind the gift. The exhibition would be called Legacy of Strength, Royal Treasures, and the Women Who Wore Them. It would trace the history of each piece, tell the stories of the remarkable women who had owned them, and culminate with Queen Elizabeth's gift to Camilla. The journal would not be displayed as all parties agreed it was too personal and should remain private, but selected quotes would be incorporated into the exhibition text. As word of the upcoming exhibition spread through official channels, public interest began to build. Royal historians were excited about the opportunity to see pieces that had been in private hands for decades. The media, initially focused on the sensational aspects of the Royal Guard's search, gradually shifted their coverage toward the touching story of Queen Elizabeth's final gift. However, not everyone was pleased with the developments. Some members of the extended royal family questioned whether these items should have been given to Camilla at all, suggesting they should have remained in the royal collection for the nation. There were quiet rumblings about the propriety of Queen Elizabeth making such significant gifts. Outside the official channels, Prince William and Catherine visited Camilla to view the treasures privately before the exhibition opened. William had his own memories of his grandmother and her meticulous attention to tradition and protocol. Seeing the letter she had written to Camilla, reading her words of support and acceptance, gave him a new perspective on the relationship between his grandmother and stepmother, Catherine, was particularly moved by the pearl earrings that had belonged to Queen Mary. She tried them on at Camilla's insistence, and the two women stood together before a mirror, spanning generations of royal women who had worn similar pieces at similar moments of uncertainty and hope. It was a quiet moment of connection that neither woman had expected. William assured Camilla that he supported both the gift and the exhibition. He understood that his grandmother's gift had been deeply personal and meaningful, and he believed the public would appreciate seeing this more intimate side of Queen Elizabeth's character. His support was important to Camilla, representing as it did the acceptance of the future generation of the royal family. Princess Anne also reached out, in her characteristic direct manner. She had known about the chest, having helped her mother pack it shortly before her death. Anne explained that their mother had been very specific about her wishes, insisting that these pieces should go to Camilla, because she understood what it meant to be criticized and doubted by the public, while still maintaining dignity and commitment to duty. Anne shared that Queen Elizabeth had spoken often in her final months about the unfair treatment Camilla had received over the years and her admiration for how Camilla had handled it all. The late Queen had wanted to make a gesture that would demonstrate her support publicly, even if it came after her death. These conversations with other family members helped Camilla feel more confident about the exhibition. She had worried that sharing the story publicly might seem like she was seeking sympathy or trying to boost her own image, but understanding that Queen Elizabeth had intended for this story to be known, that it was part of her legacy, made Camilla more comfortable with the public nature of the reveal. Dr. Marsh worked closely with Camilla on the exhibition text, ensuring that every word honored the late Queen's memory, while accurately representing the significance of each piece. They included historical photographs, sketches from royal archives, and even some personal diary entries from Queen Victoria and Queen Mary that referenced the items, one particularly touching. Addition to the exhibition was a photograph of Queen Elizabeth wearing the diamond brooch during a difficult moment in her reign, paired with a recent photograph of Camilla wearing the same piece at a charity event. The parallel images would speak volumes without needing extensive explanation. As the opening date approached, Camilla found herself experiencing a mix of emotions. She was honored to share these treasures with the public and grateful for the opportunity to honor Queen Elizabeth's memory in such a meaningful way. But she was also nervous about the scrutiny and commentary that would inevitably follow. The night before the exhibition opened, Camilla returned alone to the room where the treasures were displayed. In the quiet of the empty gallery, surrounded by these pieces that had witnessed so much history, she felt a profound connection to the women who had come before her. Their struggles may have been different in specifics, but the core challenges of public service, personal sacrifice, and maintaining grace under pressure were timeless. The morning of the exhibition opening dawned bright and clear, almost as if the weather itself was cooperating with the significance of the day. Camilla had barely slept, running through her planned remarks and worrying about every possible detail. Charles had stayed by her side, offering quiet support and reassurance as he had done so many times over their years together. The exhibition was being held at a special gallery within Windsor Castle, a location chosen specifically because Queen Elizabeth had spent so much of her life there and had selected the treasures from her private apartments in the castle. The venue had been prepared with extraordinary care, with each piece displayed in custom cases that allowed visitors to see them from multiple angles while keeping them secure. The opening ceremony was planned as an intimate affair, with only selected guests including royal historians, museum curators, representatives from various charities Camilla patronized, and a few carefully chosen members of the press. Camilla had insisted on keeping it small, wanting the focus to remain on the treasures and their history rather than turning it into a grand royal spectacle. As guests began to arrive, Camilla stood near the entrance with Charles, greeting each person personally. She noticed several elderly women in the crowd, former ladies-in-waiting and palace staff who had served Queen Elizabeth for decades. Their presence moved her deeply, knowing that they had seen firsthand the late Queen's character and decisions. Lady Margaret Thornton, who had been one of Queen Elizabeth's closest confidants for over 40 years, approached Camilla with tears in her eyes. She took Camilla's hands in her own and spoke quietly, sharing that she had been present when Queen Elizabeth had written the letter and packed the chest. The late Queen had been very deliberate about every item chosen, spending hours going through her personal collection and selecting each piece for its symbolic meaning. Lady Margaret revealed something that Dr. Marsh's research hadn't uncovered. The diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria had been the late Queen's own favorite piece, one she had worn during some of the most challenging moments of her reign, including the period after Princess Diana's death, when the monarchy faced its greatest modern crisis. By giving it to Camilla, Queen Elizabeth had been offering not just a piece of jewelry, but a tangible symbol of strength and survival. As the formal ceremony began, Dr. Marsh provided an overview of the exhibition and the historical significance of the pieces. She spoke eloquently about each item, tracing its journey through generations of royal hands and explaining the moments in history it had witnessed. Her presentation was both scholarly and deeply human, connecting the artifacts to the real women who had owned and cherished them. Then it was Camilla's turn to speak. She had prepared remarks but found herself departing from her notes as emotion overtook careful planning. She spoke from the heart about receiving the chest, about the confusion and fear when the royal guards had arrived, and about the overwhelming moment of reading Queen Elizabeth's letter. Her voice wavered as she shared excerpts from that letter, reading the late Queen's words aloud to the assembled guests. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as people heard Queen Elizabeth's private thoughts about duty, resilience, and the special bond between women who understand the unique challenges of royal life. Camilla spoke honestly about her own journey, acknowledging the difficulties and the criticism she had faced over the years. She talked about the loneliness of knowing that some people would never accept her, and the constant pressure of trying to prove herself worthy of her position. But she also spoke about the unexpected kindness she had received from Queen Elizabeth, especially in the late Queen's final years. She revealed that the relationship between them had been complicated at first, which everyone already knew, but that it had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than she had ever expected. Queen Elizabeth had become not just her husband's mother or her sovereign, but a mentor who understood the peculiar challenges of her position in a way that few others could. The audience was captivated as Camilla described discovering the journal and reading the entries from Queen Victoria, Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Though she didn't read from the journal itself, respecting its private nature, she shared the themes that connected these women across the generations. The struggle to balance personal feelings with public duty, the pain of criticism, and the strength found in commitment to something larger than oneself. She spoke about her conversation with Margaret Stevens, the woman who had made the anonymous tip. This revelation caused some murmurs in the crowd, as most people hadn't known the full story behind the investigation. Camilla explained that she was sharing this not to embarrass Margaret, who wasn't present, but to illustrate an important point about compassion and understanding. Everyone faces their own battles, Camilla said, and sometimes people lash out because of their own pain rather than from genuine malice. She had learned from Queen Elizabeth's example that responding to hurt with compassion rather than retaliation was a mark of true strength. The late Queen had faced criticism and challenges throughout her long reign, but had never let bitterness take root in her heart. As Camilla concluded her remarks, she thanked everyone present for honoring Queen Elizabeth's memory by attending the exhibition. She expressed hope that visitors would see in these treasures not just beautiful objects, but symbols of the continuity and resilience of the institution they all served. The monarchy had survived and thrived through centuries because of the strength of the people who served it, especially the women who had done so while facing unique challenges and constraints. The formal ceremony ended with a moment of silence in memory of Queen Elizabeth, followed by the unveiling of a special plaque that would remain permanently installed in the exhibition space. The plaque bore a quote from Queen Elizabeth's letter to Camilla. "These treasures have witnessed history and survived it, as you have and will continue to do." After the ceremony, guests were invited to tour the exhibition at their leisure. Camilla walked through with small groups, answering questions and sharing additional stories about the pieces. She noticed people spending long minutes in front of each display, reading the detailed historical information and studying the photographs that showed the various queens wearing the pieces. The pearl earrings from Queen Mary attracted particular attention, especially when visitors learned that they had been worn at multiple royal weddings across the generations. The small locket from Princess Beatrice with its miniature portrait and lock of hair moved many visitors to tears with its intimate, personal nature. Throughout the day, Camilla watched as people connected with the exhibition in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Young women studying history talked excitedly about the queens they were learning about in new ways. Older visitors shared memories of seeing Queen Elizabeth wearing some of these pieces at various public events over the decades. The exhibition was creating conversations and connections that went beyond simple appreciation of beautiful objects. One particularly touching moment came when a group of military veterans approached Camilla. Their spokesperson, a woman who had served in the armed forces for 30 years, thanked her for sharing the story of these treasures. She explained that she and her fellow veterans understood something about duty, sacrifice, and facing criticism while trying to serve with honor. Seeing that even queens and royal women face similar challenges and finding the strength to persevere was deeply meaningful to them. As the day progressed and more visitors came through, Camilla noticed a shift in the atmosphere around her. Staff members who had always been respectful but somewhat distant seemed warmer and more genuine in their interactions. It was as if Queen Elizabeth's public endorsement, even from beyond the grave, had given people permission to see Camilla differently. The media coverage of the exhibition exceeded everyone's expectations, but in a positive way. Rather than focusing on scandal or controversy, most outlets ran thoughtful pieces about Queen Elizabeth's character, her relationship with Camilla, and the historical significance of the treasures. Several newspapers ran full-page spreads showing the pieces alongside historical photographs and excerpts from Camilla's speech. Social media reactions were mixed, as they always were with anything royal, but the overall sentiment was more positive than negative. Many people commented that they had gained new appreciation for both Queen Elizabeth's wisdom and Camilla's grace in handling a difficult situation. The story of the anonymous tip and Camilla's compassionate response particularly resonated with people, with many expressing admiration for her approach. That evening, as Camilla and Charles returned to their private quarters, they were both emotionally exhausted but satisfied. The day had been everything they had hoped it would be and more. The exhibition had honored Queen Elizabeth's memory beautifully, while also telling a story about resilience, compassion, and the bonds between women across generations. Charles poured them both a drink and they sat together in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. He told her how proud he was of her, not just for the day's events but for her strength and grace throughout the entire ordeal. She had turned what could. In the weeks following the exhibition opening, something remarkable happened that no one had quite anticipated. The story of Queen Elizabeth's gift to Camilla resonated far beyond the usual royal watching circles. People from all walks of life began sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness from older women in their lives, of mentorship that had come from surprising sources, and of finding acceptance after years of feeling judged. Letters poured into Clarence's house, thousands of them, from people around the world. Many were from women who had been through divorces and remarriages, who had faced public criticism or family disapproval, and who found hope in Camilla's story. Others came from people who had made mistakes in their lives and were trying to move forward with dignity, drawing inspiration from the compassion Camilla had shown to Margaret Stevens. Camilla read as many of these letters as she could, often becoming emotional at the raw honesty and vulnerability people shared with her. One letter came from a woman in her 70s who had been estranged from her daughter-in-law for years. Reading about Queen Elizabeth's acceptance of Camilla had inspired her to reach out and attempt reconciliation. She wrote that if a queen could find it in her heart to forgive and accept, surely she could do the same. Another particularly moving letter came from a young woman who had felt like an outsider in her husband's family since their wedding. She had been on the verge of ending the marriage, feeling that she could never measure up to their expectations. The story of Camilla's perseverance and eventual acceptance gave her the courage to keep trying, to believe that with time and genuine effort, she might find her place. The exhibition itself became one of the most visited royal displays in recent memory. People queued for hours to see the treasures, but more importantly, to read the story behind them. The gallery had to extend its hours to accommodate the crowds, and there were discussions about creating a touring version that could travel to other parts of the country. Dr. Marsh reported that the exhibition was having an unexpected educational impact. Schools were bringing students to see it, using it as a springboard for discussions about history, family relationships, and social change. The story of women's roles in the monarchy across generations was resonating with young people who were thinking about leadership, tradition, and progress in new ways. About a month after the opening, Camilla received a request that surprised her. Margaret Stevens, the woman who had made the anonymous tip, asked for another meeting. Through her lawyer, she explained that she had been attending counseling as Camilla had suggested and wanted to share how the process was helping her heal and grow. Camilla agreed to the meeting, though Charles was more hesitant this time. He worried that Margaret might be taking advantage of his wife's kindness, but Camilla felt strongly that she should see what Margaret had to say. The meeting took place in the same private office as before, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Margaret looked healthier and more composed than she had during their first meeting. She thanked Camilla for suggesting counseling and for offering to provide a reference for future employment. However, she said she had realized through her therapy that she needed to fully own her actions and their consequences before she could move forward. She didn't want any favors or special treatment. She just wanted Camilla to know that she was taking responsibility for what she had done. She had written a formal apology, not just to Camilla, but to the royal guards who had wasted their time on her false report, to the palace staff whose work had been disrupted, and to Queen Elizabeth's memory for trying to cause scandal around the late Queen's generous gift. She presented these letters to Camilla, not asking her to deliver them but sharing them as evidence of her genuine remorse. Margaret explained that watching the exhibition coverage and reading about the treasure's history had made her realize how petty and cruel her actions had been. She had tried to hurt someone who had never done anything to her, motivated purely by her own bitterness and resentment. Seeing how Camilla had responded with compassion rather than vengeance had forced her to confront the kind of person she had become and commit to changing. Camilla listened carefully, and when Margaret finished speaking, she did something unexpected. She thanked Margaret for coming back and for doing the difficult work of genuine self-reflection and growth. She explained that holding on to anger and resentment would hurt no one but herself, so she chose to fully forgive Margaret and wish her well in whatever came next. The two women talked for another hour, not about the past but about the future. Margaret shared that she was training for a new career in counseling herself, wanting to help others who were struggling with workplace transitions and feelings of rejection. Camilla encouraged this path, sharing some of her own experiences with finding purpose after major life changes. When Margaret left, Camilla felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected. The cycle of hurt and retaliation had been broken, replaced with genuine forgiveness and mutual growth. It felt like a fitting conclusion to a story that had begun with suspicion and pain, but had transformed into something meaningful and redemptive. Meanwhile, the journal that had been discovered in the chest was creating its own legacy, though in a much more private way. Camilla had decided to add her own entry to it, continuing the tradition that Queen Victoria had started over a century earlier. She wrote about her experiences, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned. She wrote about Queen Elizabeth's gift and what it had meant to her. But more importantly, she wrote advice for whoever might receive the journal next. She reflected on the importance of patience, of giving people time to accept change, and of never letting criticism define your worth or dictate your actions. She wrote about the power of compassion and the strength required to respond to hurt with grace rather than retaliation. She also made a decision about the journal's future. After consulting with Charles and other family members, she decided that, when the time came, the journal should go to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Catherine would one day be queen consort herself, and she would face her own challenges and criticisms. The journal, with its accumulated wisdom from generations of royal women, would be there to guide and support her just as it had supported Camilla. Catherine was deeply moved when Camilla shared this decision with her. The two women had always had a cordial relationship, but this gesture deepened their bond. Catherine understood that she was being entrusted with something precious, a legacy of strength and resilience that transcended any individual person or generation. The success of the exhibition led to discussions about the long-term home for the treasures. While they legally belonged to Camilla, she felt strongly that they should be accessible to the public in some way. After much consideration and consultation, with the Royal Collection Trust, a decision was reached. The pieces would remain in Camilla's personal possession during her lifetime, but they would be regularly loaned to the Royal Collection for public display. After her death, they would be donated to the nation with the stipulation that they be displayed together as a collection, along with the story of Queen Elizabeth's gift. The journal, however, would remain private, passed down through the women of the royal family. This arrangement satisfied everyone. The public would continue to have access to these historically significant pieces. Camilla would retain the personal connection that made them so meaningful, and the story that had brought them to light would be preserved for future generations. As spring turned to summer, the intense public interest in the exhibition began to naturally settle into a steadier, sustainable level of engagement. The initial crowds thinned somewhat, but the exhibition remained popular, with a constant flow of visitors who came to see the treasures and connect with the history they represented. Camilla found that her experience with the treasures had changed her approach to her royal duties. She felt more confident, more grounded in her role. Queen Elizabeth's endorsement, even posthumously, had given her a sense of legitimacy and acceptance that all the official titles and ceremonies hadn't quite managed. She knew that not everyone would ever fully accept her, but she had stopped needing universal approval. She began taking on more challenging projects, supporting causes that were important to her even when they might be controversial. She spoke more freely in her public addresses, sharing more of her authentic self rather than hiding behind formal protocol. The public response was largely positive, with many people commenting that she seemed more relaxed and genuine than ever before. Charles noticed the change in his wife and was grateful for it. He had always known her strength and character, but he was glad that others were finally seeing what he had seen all along. The treasures and their story had given the public a window into a private relationship and a depth of character that formal appearances and official photographs could never fully convey. A year after the royal guards had searched her possessions, Camilla stood in the exhibition gallery once again, but this time for a very different reason. The anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death was approaching, and the royal family had decided to mark the occasion with a special memorial service. Before the public ceremony, Camilla wanted a private moment with the treasures that had so profoundly changed her life. She stood before the diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, studying it in the soft gallery lighting. How many tears had this piece witnessed? How many moments of private anguish had it adorned? How many times had it been worn as armor against the world's judgment? The brooch had survived wars, scandals, personal tragedies, and the slow march of social change. And it was still here, still beautiful, still meaningful. Dr. Marsh had joined her in the gallery, and the two women had become genuine friends over the past year. Helena shared that the exhibition had inspired her team to begin a larger project, documenting the personal possessions of royal women throughout history. There were so many stories that had been overlooked or forgotten, so many examples of strength and resilience that deserved to be remembered and celebrated. Camilla mentioned something she had been thinking about for months. She wanted to establish a charitable foundation focused on supporting women going through difficult transitions in their lives. Whether it was divorce, widowhood, career changes, or any other major life upheaval, the foundation would provide counseling, support groups, and practical assistance. It would be funded in part by proceeds from a book she was writing about the treasures and their history. The book project had been suggested by several publishers, but Camilla had been hesitant at first, not wanting to appear to be capitalizing on Queen Elizabeth's gift. However, after much reflection and consultation with the family, she had decided that sharing the full story in her own words was the best way to honor the late Queen's legacy and the message of resilience that the treasures represented. She had been working with a writer to craft the book, which would include not just the story of discovering the treasures, but also historical background on each piece, reflections on the women who had owned them, and thoughtful commentary on duty, service, and finding strength in difficult times. All proceeds would go to the foundation, ensuring that the treasure's legacy would continue to help people long into the future. Margaret Stevens had reached out again, asking if she could volunteer with the foundation once it was established. She had completed her counseling certification and wanted to give back by helping others who were struggling with workplace transitions and feelings of rejection. Camilla had agreed, feeling that Margaret's personal journey of growth and redemption perfectly embodied what the foundation was meant to achieve. As the anniversary memorial service approached, Camilla made another decision. She would wear the diamond brooch that day, the one that Queen Victoria had worn through her darkest times. It felt appropriate to honor Queen Elizabeth by wearing the piece the late Queen had most wanted her to have, the symbol of survival and strength that connected them across time and circumstance. The memorial service was held at Westminster Abbey, a solemn and beautiful ceremony attended by dignitaries from around the world. When Camilla arrived wearing the brooch, its presence was noted immediately by those who knew its significance. It sparkled in the light filtering through the Abbey's magnificent windows, a quiet but powerful statement about continuity, acceptance, and the unbreakable bonds between the women who had served the crown. During the service, Prince William gave a moving tribute to his grandmother, speaking about her wisdom, her dedication, and her ability to see the best in people even when others could not. He mentioned specifically her gift to Camilla, noting that it demonstrated her forward-thinking nature and her understanding that the monarchy's strength came not from rigidity, but from its ability to evolve while maintaining core values. His words brought tears to Camilla's eyes. The public acknowledgement from William, the future king, of Queen Elizabeth's acceptance and support, meant more than any official title or public appearance ever could. It was a generational passing of not just power, but also of understanding and compassion. After the service, as the royal family gathered privately, Princess Anne approached Camilla and embraced her warmly. Anne had always been direct and sometimes brusque, but her affection was genuine. She told Camilla that their mother would be proud of what she had done with the treasures in their story. Queen Elizabeth had hoped that her gift would give Camilla confidence and public acceptance, but she had achieved far more than that, turning a personal gift into a public legacy that would benefit others for years to come. In the months that followed, the foundation was officially launched with a ceremony at Clarence House. The event brought together an unusual mix of people, royalty and commoners, celebrities and regular citizens, all united by the foundation's mission of supporting women through life transitions. Margaret Stevens was there, now a certified counselor and the foundation's first volunteer coordinator. The foundation's work began immediately, establishing support groups in communities across the country. They offered counseling services on a sliding scale, so no one would be turned away for lack of funds. They created educational programs about resilience and provided practical assistance like job training and financial planning workshops. One of the foundation's most popular programs was a mentorship initiative that paired women going through difficult transitions with others who had successfully navigated similar challenges. It was inspired by the journal and the way royal women had supported each other across generations, extending that same model of support to everyone regardless of status or background. Camilla visited foundation locations regularly, often sitting in on support group meetings and sharing her own experiences. She was always honest about her struggles, never pretending that being royal made difficulties easier, or that acceptance had come quickly or easily. Her authenticity resonated with the women the foundation served, who appreciated that she treated them as equals rather than as subjects receiving charity. The book was published the following spring, timed to coincide with what would have been Queen Elizabeth's birthday. It was titled Treasures of Strength, A Legacy of Royal Women, and became an immediate bestseller. Critics praised its honest and thoughtful approach to royal history, its beautiful photography of the treasures, and Camilla's personal reflections on duty, service, and resilience. The book tour took Camilla to bookstores and community centers across the country, where she spoke to crowds who had never expected to see a member of the royal family in their local venues. She insisted on keeping the events accessible and informal, wanting to reach regular people who might benefit from the book's message, rather than just the usual royal watchers. At one event in a small town in the north of England, an elderly woman approached Camilla during the signing. She pressed something into Camilla's hand, a small tarnished locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside was a faded photograph and a lock of hair, much like Princess Beatrice's locket in the royal collection. The woman explained that her grandmother had worn that locket through 2 world wars, the death of her husband, and the challenges of raising 6 children alone. When her grandmother died, the locket had been passed to her with instructions to give it to someone who needed its strength. After reading Camilla's book and learning about the treasures, she felt that the locket belonged with the collection, as a symbol that royal and common women alike had always found ways to carry their strength with them. Camilla was deeply moved and accepted the locket with gratitude. She arranged for it to be displayed alongside the royal treasures in a new section of the exhibition, titled Strength Knows No Rank. The section would feature items donated by ordinary people, each with its own story of resilience and survival. It became one of the most popular parts of the exhibition, as visitors saw their own family stories reflected in these humble but meaningful objects. The exhibition evolved into something living and dynamic, rather than a static historical display. New items were regularly added to the Strength Knows No Rank section, as people donated objects that had helped them or their ancestors through difficult times. Each item was carefully cataloged and displayed with its story, creating a growing tapestry of human resilience that complemented the royal treasures. On the 2nd anniversary of the Royal Guard's search, Camilla reflected on how profoundly those events had changed her life. What had begun as a frightening and humiliating experience had transformed into one of the most meaningful chapters of her time as queen consort. She had discovered not just treasures but a legacy, not just acceptance but purpose. She thought often about Queen Elizabeth and the wisdom that had guided her gift. The late queen had understood something fundamental about human nature and about the power of tangible symbols. The treasures were beautiful and historically significant, but their real value lay in what they represented. The idea that strength can be passed down, that we are all connected to those who came before us, and that acceptance and understanding can triumph over judgment and division. The journal remained private, carefully guarded but regularly